Now, a renaissance is currently underway near the North Pole in Norway. The Arctic fox, a once threatened species, is returning to its native land thanks to the work of scientists. Jennifer Ben-Brahim has more.
In this vast land near the Arctic Circle, a certain species native to the region was once feared to be on the brink of disappearing. Today is a special day, though, as these boxes hold a surprise. Arctic foxes are returning to the wild. Soon they'll once again hunt, dig their dens, and repopulate Scandinavia. To make this possible, Norwegian scientists have set up a breeding facility 400 kilometres inland. Arctic foxes were once hunted for their precious fur. This time they face a new challenge to their survival. The number of rodents, their source of food, has dropped due to climate change.
The problem has then been more that the populations were so low that they didn't manage to sustain themselves and grow again.
Christine placed a pair of foxes in this enclosure. In the early 2000s, there were no more than 50 foxes in Scandinavia.
This is their den far below ground here, and they've dug a long tunnel in there. Some couples have their own dens and they sleep separately, because some couples are a lot more lovey-dovey than others.
Every day, raw meat is delivered to the 8 enclosures. Spring is here, and the foxes must mate, under the watchful eye of cameras. These scientists are tasked with monitoring the births.
During the spring, when the puppies are born, that's also when the snow is melting and it runs down, and then you have tiny puppies getting wet and cold, and then that's obviously not ideal.
It's like when the puppies start coming out of the dens, we can count the number of them, we can see the interactions between the parents and the pups and how they grow up, so that's really useful.
It's summer and the snow has vanished. So has their white fur. Some litters can be as large as 10 foxes, the same number that are set to be released into the Arctic. Here they are 8 months later, just before their big journey back to the wild. Their ears are shorter than those of red foxes. Dozens of cages travel across Norway each year. Their goal? To rebuild a large enough fox population to spread across all of Scandinavia. They're in boxes, ready for the big day. It's minus 20 degrees Celsius, a temperature they're used to. A few feeding spots are set up nearby to help with the transition.
The release into the wild is definitely the highlight every year. The goal is not to continue feeding them forever. It's just a temporary measure to get the populations up to a more sustainable, viable level, and then it will be stopped.
Today, around 600 Arctic foxes live freely in Northern Europe. Scientists hope to double that number in the years to come.
We're going to talk more about this now with Aurore Dupuis from our Environment Desk. Hi, Aurore.
Hi, Jeannie.
It's so great to see that the population of these Arctic foxes is slowly coming back to life. But what challenges do they face once they're released into the wild?
Well, the main challenge is, of course, climate change. Milder winters mean less snow, and so it is harder for Arctic foxes to camouflage and to hunt. Because of rising temperatures, the Arctic tundra, which is the vast treeless region in the far north of the world, well, it is shrinking. Vegetation is now growing because the ground is getting warmer, and the forest is therefore expanding. But why does that matter to Arctic foxes, you might wonder? Well, because forested areas are the territory of red foxes, their competitors. And red foxes are larger, stronger, more aggressive. And so as they move further into the Arctic habitats, they take polar foxes food and dens. And bear in mind that in the wild, these specific foxes cannot rely on the feeding stations that they once relied on at the breeding centres. So survival is really tough for them.
Now, there were only 40 to 60 Arctic foxes, more or less, that were left in the region in the early 2000s. Since that first release in 2006, there's now over 500. So obviously that's much better, but it's still a relatively small number. Are there lots of worries about inbreeding amongst these foxes?
Yes, inbreeding is a major concern because it reduces the genetic diversity. It increases the risks of malformations, of diseases. and, of course, lower fertility. Now, scientists are trying to curb that problem by regularly collecting DNA samples from the fox's fur or from their droppings, for example, and these samples help them identify individuals that are not too closely related. Now, at Norway's breeding station, fox pairings are done strategically thanks to a family tree system. They also have to choose their release locations very carefully, and they often collaborate with other breeders in Sweden or in Finland to reduce isolated breeding. Now, in 2010 in Sweden, a ranger noticed that Arctic foxes had turned slightly blue. And that's because Norwegian researchers released a different kind of foxes there, the ones with blue morphs in southern Norway, and they had migrated 150 miles away to the Swedish subpopulation where they reproduced. And in just 5 years following their arrival, well, the population of that clan nearly doubled.
And some conservation projects are even using sperm and embryo banks for possible future use.
Yes, these technologies are becoming really crucial to save endangered species, especially as climate change and deforestation accelerate the loss of biodiversity. Now, genetic banks store frozen material that can be used in assisted reproduction or even future cloning. China, for example, uses artificial insemination to boost the population of giant pandas. The world's first panda conceived that way was born in 2009. And more recently, in 2020, the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. celebrated the birth of a panda cub born from a frozen sperm to a 22-year-old mum who had less than 1% chance of giving birth. So that's huge. And that same year, the very first cloned Przewalski's horses was born in Texas, thanks to frozen DNA that had been stored since 1980. So all this is great news, but these technologies are really complex and they're expensive, and they certainly don't address the root causes of wild animals' decline.
All right, Aurora, thanks so much for that update. France 24's Aurora Dupuis.